Hello everybody, we are right outside the Circuit of the Americas, the historic COTA. Now this weekend, it's going to host its first ever sprint race. So I think we should talk about the sprint race, pros and cons, kind of how it works. Lydia, talk us through the format. Now it's a little different, isn't it? Tell us why that is.
Yeah, so Friday morning they will have their first and only free practice session, which obviously lasts an hour. Later on the Friday, you then have qualifying, which sets up the grid for the race, the Grand Prix race on the Sunday. Saturdays are now completely separate. So Saturday morning you have the sprint shootout, which is essentially a smaller, shorter format of qualifying. It's specified which tyres they have to use.
Now this is the confusing bit. I literally write about F1 every day and I still don't know this.
So SQ1
Shootout qualifying 1
and SQ2 shootout qualifying 2.
Oh really?
You have to use the medium tyres. SQ3 it has to be softs. I hope I'm correct.
Now that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, in the perfect world, teams would want to qualify on soft tyres because it gives them straight away they can get heat into the tyres. They don't have to worry about it lasting, a large percentage of the race. Mm-hmm. They can do a warm-up lap and then a quick flying lap. And, the soft tyres obviously give you the maximum amount of grip. The medium tyres, they need a little more warming up, don't they? Because they're a more denser rubber. They're for longer stretches on a race. Now, for qualifying, mediums don't quite work, and this adds another layer of interest, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It also means that teams with differing levels of car performance, if let's say a lower end team, they could potentially outdrive a higher end team because of how different cars light up their tires in different ways. So, for example, the Mercedes, they really struggle to put heat into their tires.
Yeah.
The Williams, not so much.
Yeah, so it's quite exciting because sometimes you can end up with quite a varied and mixed up grid to what you would usually see. So then obviously following the sprint shootout, you have the sprint race, which again, so if you win the sprint race, so last year if you won, you would then take pole position for the race on the Sunday. That is no longer the case. So,
and that's great, isn't it? Because there's a history that accompanies the term Grand Prix. It's the big prize. And I don't feel like a sprint race should give you pole at the Grand Prix.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is obviously you've got Saturday. It's a completely separate entity now. It doesn't change Sunday at all. So sometimes, maybe it's just me, but when we get to Sunday, I've almost forgotten what the starting grid is, because we've gone through Saturday where you find out the starting grid for the sprint race, you then have the sprint race, someone wins, and then it's like, oh, what actually happened on Friday, to remember who's on pole. Yeah,
let's lead on from that and talk about the cons of this weekend. So I think the major con, at least from the team's perspective, is the fact that they haven't got the practice time. They're going to be relying on simulator work, data they got from previous races. And then it's a big rush during the one and only practice session to set up the car. And I suppose you could flip that the other way. It actually makes for a more interesting race for viewers, because the fastest car, if it's not set up properly, sometimes isn't the fastest car. So look at Singapore, for example. Red Bull, the RB19, is obviously one of the fastest cars on the grid. They didn't set it up right, and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Now, you said that yes, the Saturday is completely separate to the Sunday, but actually because we don't have the practice sessions, you're right, as in, it's great because it doesn't affect the Sunday, but because we don't have the practice sessions, we do then have a bit more of a mixed grid. Again, that's more of like a team issue and a driver issue, not a viewer issue.
Yeah, it's more entertaining, if anything, for the fans, but for strategists, it's probably a complete pain.
Oh, it must be. It must be. I can't really think of many other cons. I think we've kind of come to terms with the fact that we are now going to have sprint weekends.
Yeah, I mean, another one from a team perspective will be the risk that they're taking, which is something that Max Verstappen has touched upon before, that if Saturday's sprint race doesn't affect Sunday, now it affects the championship because they still can earn championship points.
Not as many.
But you can still get some. So it still is part of the championship, but it's his argument was, why would I make unnecessary risks to have damage to the car for a sprint race?
And this is Max, an aggressive driver
Yeah.
who does take risks.
Yeah.
So that's really saying something.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the pros of the sprint weekend. There's more to watch,
Yep.
but the qualifying
Mm.
is on the Friday. What about people at work?
Yeah, that's been a big thing that fans have been saying as well. Is like, obviously, the majority of fans, it's very expensive to come to watch an F1 race. So the majority of people obviously have to watch from home. Watching a qualifying, sometimes, like Monaco, for example, in my opinion, qualifying is a lot more exciting than the race can be, because if it's difficult to overtake, then qualifying is so important.
Yeah.
So I do feel that qualifying is one of the main events of the weekend that fans love. So it is difficult if they can't actually watch that. Also, watching it later is so hard because you've got social media, everything like that.
You can't stay away from
You
the spoilers,
can't
can you?
avoid finding out who's on pole position, and that is obviously one of the most exciting parts of the weekend.
Yeah. So there we go. There we have it. Keeping this short and sweet. We're going into a sprint weekend right now. Like I said, the first one at Circuit of the Americas, the United States Grand Prix, one of 3 now. There are lots of points to be had. I feel like Mercedes could make a real jump here. I feel like McLaren could make a real jump here. And Sergio Perez, he really needs to be on his guard. Make sure you follow us all over social media, because we will be reporting from Austin right here, right now. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Lydia, for explaining the sprint race format.